All right, we're continuing. This is on page Roman numeral. This is Rajani 4, correct? RP4. This is from page 22, Roman numeral 22, note on the Angikuden. It goes as follows: the origin of the Angikuden. The title Angikuden means the record of the orally transmitted teachings of Nichiren. The text is found in the Nichiren Daishonin Gosho Zenshu, or the complete works of Nichiren Daishonin, published by the Soka Gakkai Tokyo in 1952. In his later years, when Nichiren was living in Mount Minobu in the province of Kai in present-day Yamanashi Prefecture, he wrote various doctrinal works and labored strenuously at other activities designed to encourage his followers and train disciples to carry on his teachings. In response to a request from his disciples, from time to time he delivered lectures on the Lotus Sutra. In one of his letters, he writes to a correspondent, "And then in time you arrived at this remote hollow and saw a lone hermitage where the sound of the Lotus Sutra recitation echoed to the blue sky, and the words expounding the single vehicle were heard among the mountains." The Angikuden represents the notes on these lectures that were recorded and put into order by Nichiren's close disciple and successor Nikko, and that, with Nichiren's permission, were handed down to posterity. After Nichiren's death, Nikko continued to gather together Nichiren's various writings and make copies of them, thus contributing greatly to the preservation of his teachings' doctrines. It would appear that Nichiren several times lectured on the Lotus Sutra during his years at Mount Minobu. A series of lecture notes on the Lotus Sutra was also compiled by Nikko Nikko, who was one of the 6 priests that went out and got kicked out of where he was going. Nikko Nikko let him back in at Minobu. A series of lecture notes on the Lotus Sutra was also compiled by Nikko, who was later designated as one of the 6 senior priests. It is known as by the title Oko Kiki Gakkai, or the recorded lectures, and is quite different in content from the Angikuden. So understand that that's the Minobu sect. That's Nichiren Shu's version of this understanding, and it doesn't have anything to do with Nichiren's true identity or your true identity, and that's why we remonstrate with them. We utilize this text. This is Nikko Nikko's text. Nikko's Nikko recorded lectures consists only of disconnected notes on certain particularly important passages of the sutra. Nikko's Angikuden on the other, Nikko's Angikuden on the other hand, corresponds with an explanation of the term Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, begins with an explanation of the term Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and then goes on to a discussion of important passages in all of the 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra, and in the 2 short sutras that serve as its introduction and conclusion, the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra and the Universal Worthy Sutra. Nichiren's explications of these key passages, sometimes taking the commentaries of Tiantai and Myolo as a starting point, present his own doctrinal interpretations in clear and simple language. The differences that exist between the lecture notes of these 2 men, Nikko Nikko and Nikko Nikko, no doubt reflect major differences in their respective understanding of Nichiren's teachings. But don't forget which one of them has always been with Nichiren Daishonin from the Izu Peninsula on, all the way through Tatsunokuchi, all the way through Sato, now all these years in Minobu. It's Nikko. So you should trust Nikko Nikko's interpretation because it's complete, and it's been able to express its validity through the empowerment that has provided others that embrace it as the truth. I'm one of them. The differences that exist between the lecture notes of these 2 men, Nikko and Nikko, no doubt reflect major differences in their respective understanding of Nichiren's teachings. The oldest version of the Angikuden, for which there are historical references, seems to have been copied on the 8th day of the 5th month of the 8th year of Tembum, 1539. It belonged to Nichikyo, a priest of the Hapon, or 8 chapters branch of the Nichiren school. Though it does not exist today, records available identify it as the oldest known copy. Content of the Angikuden on page 33, Roman numeral 33. The content, as noted above, begins with a discussion of the term Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and then comments on a total of 231 key passages from the 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra, the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra, and the Universal Worthy Sutra. Continuing on page 34. This is followed by a section that comments on one particularly significant passage in each of the chapters of the Lotus Sutra, and by a concluding section entitled All 28 Chapters of the Lotus Sutra are Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This arrangement of the material in the Angikuden is closely related to the thought of the work as a whole, reflecting Nichiren's conviction that Nam-myoho Renge-kyo represents the heart or core of his teaching and of the Lotus Sutra, and that the 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra constitutes explications from various angles of how it functions. As the Angikuden itself states on page 221, now when Nichiren and his followers, and that's the beautiful thing is going to be revealed as we read this, every time the Daishonin qualifies something about himself, he says, you are included exactly on an equal level with himself, as a person of the same mind as Nichiren. Because when he says disciples, he's talking about true disciples, not hangers-on or, people that are not trying to achieve Kosen Rufu. If you're the same mind as Nichiren, then what you're worried about is widespread propagation, not what's going on in your life, okay? You work for the law, just as he has. Okay, so he says on page 221, we'll get to it eventually. Now when Nichiren and his followers propagate Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, this is the principle or essence or heart. The 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra are the principle of function. So he calls Nam-myoho Renge-kyo the heart, and the 28 chapters a reflection. It's a function. It's what allowed and manifested for the express purpose of Nichiren's advent, so that Nam-myoho Renge-kyo would have a doctrinal foundation. That's why it's called function. Okay? So the 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra are the principle of function. Do you understand? The opening passage on Nam-myoho Renge-kyo describes in simple terms the deep... So in other words, what that just said was that Nam-myoho Renge-kyo doesn't come from the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra comes from Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay? You just can't perceive that because of the issue of time. All right? So the original state precedes this. And as we read this, you'll find that something called the Lotus Sutra was already preached way before Shakyamuni made his advent on earth, when he was just the 16th son of the great universal wisdom excellence Buddha. That Buddha was preaching the Lotus Sutra. Now, could it be the same Lotus Sutra that he's preaching? It couldn't be, but it's the function of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo for that time, for those disciples, for that Buddha to preach. Understand that. This is the prelude. This is the meat. Okay, so the opening passage on Nam-myoho Renge-kyo describes it in simple terms, the deep, start again. Middle of page 34. The opening passage on Nam-myoho Renge-kyo describes in simple terms the deep philosophical significance of this concept. In the comments on key passages of the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren at times quotes from commentaries by earlier Buddhist scholars such as Tentai and Myoho, then basing himself on the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, based on his own actual Ichinen Sanzen, he makes clear how ordinary persons in the evil age, that is the latter day of the law, which is where he's living now, which Tentai and Myoho did not, by carrying out the practice appropriate with that age, the latter day, now we're here, and putting faith in and upholding the truth of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, because it's the true teaching for the 10,000 years and beyond of Mappo, can attain Buddhahood. So let me go backwards, because until Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is all theoretical. All right? Let me go back and reread all of that again. The opening passage on Nam-myoho Renge-kyo describes in simple terms the deep philosophical significance of this concept, that Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is what the Lotus Sutra comes from. That doesn't come, it's not that Nam-myoho Renge-kyo comes from the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra comes from Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, what I had just clarified from the previous paragraph. Okay, so okay. The opening passage on Nam-myoho Renge-kyo describes in simple terms the deep philosophical significance of this concept. In the comments on the key passages in the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren at times quotes from the commentaries by earlier Buddhist scholars such as Tentai Myoho. Then, basing himself on the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, actual Ichiden Sanzen, because it's the latter day of the law and he chants Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, he makes clear how ordinary persons, just like himself, in the evil age that is the latter day of the law, by carrying out the practice appropriate to that age, just as he did, and putting faith in upholding the truth of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, just as he did, can attain Buddhahood, just as he did. Interpreting the sutra freely, because he's the Buddha, and in a manner that accords with his own unique point of view, he proceeds, which is the Buddhism of sowing, he proceeds to bring to light what he regards as the ultimate significance of the work. So we're not here to read this for the sake of what Shakyamuni said. We're here to read what Nichiren said about this for our sake, the bits that are important for us to know, okay, that can be utilized as segues to perceive the deeper understanding of his teaching. The earlier commentaries, continuing on page, where are we at on time? Okay. The earlier commentaries by Tentai and Myoho, this is still on page 34, the bottom, by Tentai and Myoho had sought to uncover the meanings that were implicit in the words. It was an interpretive process, not literal interpretation or reading of it. The earlier commentaries by Tentai and Myoho had sought to uncover the meanings that were implicit in the words of this Lotus Sutra. In the passages of the Angikun that deal with Nichiren's own interpretation of the text, however, he seeks to reveal the underlying intent or purport of the work in reinterpreting the key passages of the sutra, in a way that they will be meaningful to now, to his contemporaries, rather than sounding like what the hell are they talking about? Because when I get into the literal rating of this, it might as well be reading a fairy tale. Those persons who are practicing Buddhism in the latter day of the law, that are reading, that are in our time zone, are in our time period. So he says, Nichiren's own interpretation on the text, however, he seeks to reveal the underlying intent or purport of the work, reinterpreting the key passage of the sutra in such a way that they will be meaningful to all of us, those persons who are practicing Buddhism in the latter day of the law. This is the focus of his attention, trying to make us understand what it was about the Lotus Sutra that we need to understand. By at times going along with his earlier commentaries of Tentai and others, and at other times speaking in a manner that departs from their views, he makes clear how his own interpretations differ from those of his predecessors and thus deepens the reader's understandings of his doctrines. In most of his comments that Nichiren makes on the Lotus Sutra, he addresses himself to the particular passage of the sutra that he has singled out for discussion. In his treatment of the lifespan chapter, however, which occupies a place of such great importance in Nichiren's doctrines as a whole, he departs from the exact wording of the text to comment on more general topics such as the jigage or verse section with which the chapter closes, or the term kuon, or time without beginning. Again, in dealing with the Bodhisattva never disparaging chapter, one of particular significance in terms of Buddhist practice, He outlines 14 different ways in which one may view the Bodhisattva's practice of bowing in obeisance to all persons. Thus, he relates it to, Thus he relates it to the words open, show, awaken, and cause them to enter of the expedient means chapter, or the words at all times I think to myself, or originally I have practiced the Bodhisattva way of the lifespan chapter. And he shows how it relates to such fundamental Buddhist concepts as birth, aging, sickness, and death, the Dharma nature, ignorance, and to such practices as pity and compassion. In the section that follows, Nichiren begins by quoting that he regards as an essential In the section that follows, Nichiren begins by quoting what he regards as an essential passage from each of the 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra. To the left and right of each passage, he then appends brief glosses that deal with the doctrinal aspect or meaning of the passage and the deeper or meditational aspect, or what has been referred to in Mr. Ikeda's foreword as the interpretation based on the observation of the mind. In a brief paragraph-marked summary, Nichiren then proceeds to outline what he sees as the true meaning of the passage in terms of his own philosophy. So in other words, as we read this, there are going to be points in time where he's going to be quoting the Lotus Sutra, and he's going to be quoting a given interpretation, and then he's going to be giving, it's called something to the left, I forget what word they use actually, but notes, that just little notations to the left of the margin and notations to the right of the margin, which are things that rather than trying to define, you really need to perceive yourself. So you go chant Daimoku about those things based on the understanding that you get from this, and then you'll understand them more deeply than just the words that he's made on the side of the notations. We'll hit that when we get to it. In the section that follows, Nichiren begins by quoting what he regards as an essential passage from each of the 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra. To the left and right of each passage, he then appends brief glosses, gloss to the left, glosses to the right, that's what it was. He then appends brief glosses that deal with the doctrinal aspect or meaning of the passage and the deeper or meditational aspect, what you chant to the Gohonzon to understand, and what has been referred to in Mr. Ikeda's foreword as the interpretation based on observation of the mind, based on your bringing forth your own innate Buddhahood. You understand those. In a brief paragraph-marked summary, Nichiren then proceeds to outline what he sees as the meaning of the passage in terms of his own philosophy. The concluding section is entitled, All 28 Chapters of the Lotus Sutra are Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. This sums up the doctrinal significance of each of the 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra and makes clear how all of the meanings represent different aspects of the single fundamental truth of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Thus, we see that the Angikuden is a work that reveals the various angles from which Nichiren viewed the concept of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, the heart of his enlightenment and subject of all of his teachings. From his comments on key passages in the Lotus Sutra, it is clear that Nichiren saw all of these as ultimately related to the concept of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, and his own explanations are intended to bring out the true meaning of this concept of this concept of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo as it is hidden in the various passages of the sutra, of the Lotus Sutra. We may thus view his teachings as a demonstration of how the countless ideas or doctrines expounded in the text of the sutra, which to modern readings may seem so manifold in their conclusions, derive in the end from this one underlying truth or law of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Continue on page 36. The thought of the Angikuden. Readers who are already familiar with Nichiren's teachings and his manner of expressing them should have little difficulty in understanding the Angikuden. But for those who lack such background knowledge, a word may be said here about the thought and manner of presentation that characterize the text. Mahayana Buddhism speaks often of two types or levels of truth. Got to understand this point. The worldly or relative truth and the supreme or absolute truth. The two types of truth are in fact referred to in the Angikuden itself on page 208. In his comments on the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren often refers to the persons and events described in the sutra in terms of their meaning on the level of relative truth. That is, as they apply to the world of ancient India depicted in the sutra. But he then frequently moves to a higher level of truth, reinterpreting the same event or passage in terms of what he sees as their absolute meaning or intention, namely how they apply to other places and ages, or to all ages and places, and to humankind, the things that are important to understand as Buddhas in the latter day of the law, how we achieve Kozen Rufu. An excellent example of this is to be found in his comments on the Simile and Parable chapter on page 209, where he refers to the big wide ox cart described in the sutra, which carries the children to the place of practice where they will attain enlightenment. But then he abruptly leaps to a higher level of truth or meaning, declaring, this passage describes how one becomes aware of the Buddha vehicle within oneself and enters the palace of oneself. Chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is what is meant by entering the palace of oneself. His comments on the literal meaning of the sutra represent the doctrinal meaning or aspect of the text. Those that relate to a higher or symbolic meaning represent the meditational aspect, or what is referred to as observation of the mind, that is, the truth underlying the passage as it is perceived through enlightenment. It is these later interpretations that represent Nichiren's true teaching, the meanings by which, as Mr. Ikeda notes in his foreword, Nichiren infused new life into the Lotus Sutra. The level of worldly or relative truth is characterized by dualistic thinking. Ideas are viewed as contrasting pairs, each term dependent upon its opposite for its existence, e.g., good, bad, happiness, unhappiness, ignorance, or enlightenment. On the level of supreme truth, however, dualistic thinking, it's something or got to be this, comparative thinking, on this dualistic thinking is transcended. On the level of supreme truth, however, dualistic thinking is transcended, and opposites, because of their lack of independent and distinctive nature, merge into a single entity. That's absolute myo, from relative myo to absolute myo. Thus, Nichiren, speaking on this level of truth, can say, as he often does, that earthly desires are none other than enlightenment, and that the sufferings of birth and death are none other than nirvana. In terms of everyday logic or the realm of worldly truth, such statements seem arbitrary or even fantastic. And I know this has to have confused other people. Mr. Lee asked me this question specifically: how can earthly desires equal enlightenment? Understood from the level of higher truth, that they're just expedient means stepping stones. Understood from the level of higher truth, however, they represent the core of Nichiren's teachings, because that's what you have access to in the beginning. You don't have access to the ability to perceive the higher teachings. You have to build to that. You have to develop faith to have the fortune to bring that forth from your life. However, they represent the core of Nichiren's teachings, the fact that all persons are in fact Buddhas. In terms of everyday logic or the realm of worldly truth, such statements seem arbitrary or even fantastic. Understood from the level of higher truth, however, they represent the core of Nichiren's teachings, the fact that all persons are in fact Buddhas. That's why, again, absolute myo is absolute myo. It contains everything, even the people that are ignorant. Where are we at on time?
2023.
2020. Okay, great. Okay, going on to the editor's note, and this is kind of short, and then I'm done. All right, editor's note on page 39. Here are some guidelines that the editors think will be helpful for readers of this book. In the Japanese text of the Ongikuden, or the record of the orally transmitted teachings, the Lotus Sutra passages on which Nichiren lectured are indicated in abbreviated form, but in this translation the passages are cited in full and in boldface. Then in some cases the sutra passages are followed by Tentai's explanation of them from his words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra, and by Milo's commentary on those explanations. Nichiren's lectures follow, beginning with the set phrase, "The record of the orally transmitted teaching says," All the Lotus Sutra quotations in this work are from the Lotus Sutra, translated by Burton Watson and published by Columbia University in 1993. So I guess that was 1993 I was talking about, not 1990. That's what his first translation. The sources of the quotations are indicated by their chapter number and a shortened form of the chapter title, as in chapter 16, Lifespan, which is enclosed in parentheses. However, when quotations are from the same chapter as is discussed in the orally transmitted teachings, only the chapter number is shown, as in chapter 12. In the commentaries on the Lotus Sutra by Tentai and others, reference is made to the related section in the Chinese text with the number of lines composing it. Usually one line consists of one verse, which consists of 4 phrases. Nichiren also makes similar references. In this translation, however, such references are made based on Dr. Watson's Lotus Sutra, indicating the number of lines in the English text. Thus, in chapter 12.7, you will find the expression, the verses of praise in 14 lines expressed in the doctrine of the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, which is the translation of the verses of praise in 3.5 lines in the Japanese text. In the Japanese text, some passages of commentary have been cited without their source titles. When these passages have been found in collections of Buddhist texts such as Taisho Daizokyo or Taisho Tripitaka, we have identified their source titles in the translation in brackets. All book titles are given in English. Additionally, most of the names of the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and deities mentioned in the text have been translated as in the writings of Nichiren Daishonin. The names of the actual historical figures, such as Shakyamuni and Shariputra, naturally remain unchanged, and all personal names are given according to the usage of their land of origin. Most diacritical marks are omitted from Sanskrit words, of which there are few in the text. But with the exception of the formula Nam-myoho Renge-kyo or Myoho Renge-kyo, all Japanese words are shown where appropriate with macrons to indicate the long vowels. Shortened vowels of the longer book titles cited in the text are used in this translation. The short forms are as follows: words and phrases for words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra, on the words and phrases for annotations on the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra by Myolo, words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra by Tentai, profound meaning for the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra by Tentai, on profound meaning for annotations on the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra by Myolo, on great concentration and insight for the annotations on great concentration and insight by Myolo, outstanding principles of the Lotus Sutra by Dengyo, supplement to the words and phrases for the supplement to the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra by Tao Xin. For more information regarding the Buddhist terms, personal names, books, titles, and Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and deities that appear in the text, readers may find helpful the Soka Gakkai Dictionary of Buddhism. Footnotes to the translation can explain any terms not found in this dictionary. So again, this book is almost kind of made to allow you as an English-speaking layperson to, if you'll go do the work, understand everything that's being said here. I know because I had to do all that. Where are we at on time?
28.
28 again? We'll stop there. Thank you.